Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next up, we'll have PCB SAC 1904 firefighters. Chair Angolia, you're recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this bill creates monetary benefits for firefighters who are diagnosed with certain types of cancer. Specifically, a firefighter who is diagnosed with one of the 21 specific types of cancer are entitled to receive cancer treatment covered with an employer-sponsored health plan or through a group health insurance trust fund, and a one-time cash payout of $25,000 upon a firefighter's initial cancer diagnosis. In addition, disability or death resulting from the cancer or treatment of cancer is deemed to have occurred in the line of duty, resulting in higher disability and death benefits for these firefighters. If the firefighter does not participate in an employer-sponsored retirement plan, the employer must provide a disability retirement plan that provides the firefighter or his or her beneficiary with at least 42% of the firefighter's annual salary at no cost to the firefighter or beneficiary. The bill also requires a division of state fire marshal within the Department of Financial Services to adopt rules to establish employer cancer prevention best practices, and that is the bill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from members? Seeing no questions, we have no amendments, so we'll go right to public testimony. First up, Jazz Zombo with Seminole County Professional Firefighters. You're recognized, and thanks for coming up from my home county, Seminole County.
Thank you. Good morning. I first want to thank the House leadership and the State Affairs Committee for hearing our bill. And I also want to thank Representative Wetlight and Latvala for sponsoring this bill. My name is Jazz Zombo. I am a firefighter paramedic with Seminole County Local 3254. I've proudly served my community for 17 years. During my career, I've been diagnosed with occupational cancer twice. This is me and my son. I'm shaking, obviously. In 2006, I was diagnosed with late-stage melanoma, and I went through a year of immunotherapy and chemotherapy, and I withered away down to about 100 pounds, and I went into cardiac arrest twice during my treatments. I remember nurses coming to the side of my bed saying, Jazz, if you don't get out of bed, you're going to die, and forcing me to get out of bed and walk the halls so I didn't die. But I survived. I got better. I went back to work, and 6 years later, during one of my annual physical exams, my lab work came back at very alarming rates, and I went to my primary care doctor, and I went to my oncologist, and they said, Jazz, your cancer's back, we just have to find it. During the same time, I had my annual women's exam, and my doctor, who'd been my OB-GYN for 16 years, said, Jazz, there's lesions down here, I'm gonna biopsy this. And I said, well, we're looking for cancer right now. And she goes, I think I found it. She sat next to my bed and she's going through my chart. She goes, where did this come from? She goes, you've never had HPV. You've never had the multiple sex partners. You've never had any high risk to get this type of cancer. And I said, my job. When I went through fire school, I was not told that I was gonna die of cancer or get cancer. It was never mentioned. They said the #1 killer of firefighters was heart attacks. The #2 was MVA, traveling to a call or from a call. They have never mentioned cancer once. When firefighters get cancer, we get fast, aggressive forms, and we're dying at ages 20, 30, 40, 50 of cancers that normally elderly get. I just want you guys to know that no firefighter wants to use these benefits that are being proposed in this bill right now. Because if they are using it, we have cancer. And I want to reassure you that we are doing things out in the field to reduce our exposures and educate our firefighters. So we are educated and can to reduce what we are, but we can't do everything. We're exposed to too much. When the public calls 911, it's because they're in trouble. But who do we call when we're in trouble? We call you guys. And I just want to thank you for answering our call. I want to thank you for letting this be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your story this morning. Next up, Jay Post. Jay Post here. You're recognized.
Hello. I'd like to thank you all for having me here. I'll try to keep this as short as possible. In June of 2017, I was diagnosed with throat cancer. In January of 2018, I had my vocal cords, my epiglottis, part of my esophagus, and some lymph nodes removed from my throat. I have never smoked a cigarette in my life. I was a firefighter for 33 years in Brevard County. This is part of what I looked like just about a year ago. And there's 3 more tubes coming out of me that you cannot see. I will never smell again. I lost my sense of smell. This is the way I will be for the rest of my life. Right now I am cancer free. I just had a scan a few months ago, and I pray it stays that way. But I am one of the lucky ones. There's many other guys that have it a lot worse than I do. And it's good that they're becoming younger and younger. And that's enough about me. What I want to talk about is the guys that this bill's going to take care of. The guys that are have 5, 10, 15 years on the job. They're in their low 30s, mid 40s. They've got their pensions going. They've got their life going. They've got their families. But more and more of them are getting cancer, and they're dying from it. And this is something that needs to be addressed. Because as of today, when they die, if they die, their families are left with virtually nothing but sorrow and debt. And I'm glad that you guys have finally seen the light and are looking to take care of us, because something needs to be done so more and more firefighters do not end up like this. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate everything you are trying to do for us.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for sharing your story and coming up from Brevard County. Next up, Ty Silcox with the Florida Fire Chiefs Association. Thank you, sir. Next up, Carlos Aviles, City of St. Augustine. You're recognized.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear this matter this morning. Please do not allow the state of Florida to be the last to provide this cancer coverage to firefighters. I'm a thyroid cancer survivor. At 27 years old, or 29 years old, I was diagnosed. In the best shape of my life, been active in the military ever since the age of 18, a non-smoker, and doctors could not figure out what was going on. You cannot travel around the state and spend any time with firefighters without hearing stories about how cancer is running through their organization. And I do want to applaud State CFO Jimmy Petronas and the State Fire Marshal's Office for the job that they're doing and for leading by example and providing fire departments all over the state with the decontamination kits, the information, and the sample policies that we need as fire chiefs to start implementing cancer prevention practices all over the state. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Tanya McKay. You recognized?
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak to you all today. My name is Tanya. My family and I reside in Clay County. My husband, who's here with me today, has been a firefighter with Clay County for 13 years. September 21st, just over 6 months ago, we went to the primary care physician due to some very mild symptoms most of you would probably take Rolaids for. Upon arriving at our primary care physician's office, she immediately broke into tears and asked me how old my children were. At the time, 16, 11, and 3. My primary care physician told us that my husband has stage 4 cancer. My husband does not smoke, my husband does not drink, and my husband does not have another job outside of the fire department. We immediately see an oncologist and schedule a PET exam and a biopsy the following week. We're then told that my husband's stage 4 diagnosis at the age of 44 cannot be fought. The doctor's words exactly were, "We do not fight this cancer. We will try to buy your husband some time to spend with your children." His diagnosis is stage 4 adenocarcinoma of the stomach, one of the 21 listed cancers that firefighters are at higher risk to receive. We determined at that point that we wanted to run genetic profiles, not covered by our insurance, to the cost of $4,800. Our doctor ran 30 separate profiles on my husband's genetics. None of them came back with genetic history. So there's no way his cancer is diagnosed as genetic. The only exposure he has is his job and his 13 years with the county. My husband has a 50% chance of making it to month 13. It's currently month 7. He's gone through one full round of chemo unsuccessfully. We found out this past week it's continuing to grow. His local union, 3362, has been very supportive. The men that he works with in our fire family have donated their personal time off to allow us to take care of him. I unfortunately was let go of my job at a small office within 2 months of getting the diagnosis, in a job that I've held for over 15 years, because the small office can't handle my absence in taking care of my husband. The financial burden on families is immeasurable. The only option we had is to file against our employer's insurance. Within 8 days, we got a denial, with no investigation into his medical, with no speaking to his doctors, and no conversation taking place with my husband to learn that he has no other factors: no drinking, no smoking, no second job. Within 8 business days, they determined that my husband's illness is not something that they would cover. We have no other options. My husband will leave this world sooner than he should, and my children will lose their father, because he decided to put his life out there to help others. Just over 13 years ago, when he came to me and said, "I'm going to switch jobs. I want to do something better. I want to help people, and I need to make a difference." He worked 2 jobs, a full-time job, a part-time job, and went to school full-time so that he could be a firefighter. Never were we told of his risk of cancer. He trained hard to avoid being injured in the job while fighting house fires and car fires and attending to those in car accidents. Never were we prepared for a diagnosis of terminal cancer at the age of 44. So your consideration to help these brave men and women who put their lives on the line, and ultimately the lives of their families on the line, to help the public in Florida. It is important that we stand behind them and their family and do what we can so that they don't have to continue to suffer these losses. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, Heather Mazurkowitz, North Collier Professional Firefighters.
Yes, sir. North Collier Professional Firefighters stand and wave in support, along with the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. We also wave in support.
Thank you. Next up, Sam Eaton, Florida Firefighter Cancer Initiative.
Sam Eaton, Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. I and the 18 losses on this helmet, as well as the hundreds and hundreds of firefighters, wave in support.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Omar Blanco with Miami-Dade Firefighters.
Miami-Dade Firefighters, wave in support.
Thank you. Next up, Bert Vergara, Osceola Firefighters.
Osceola County Firefighters, wave in support of the bill.
Thank you. Next up, Scott Bilecki, professional firefighters of Palm Beach County.
Palm Beach County firefighters waive support, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, Amber Hughes, Florida League of Cities. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amber Hughes, representing the Florida League of Cities. I want to start off today. There's been a lot of discussion that we are against firefighters, and that is definitely not the case. They are employees in our city. They are members of our cities. They are friends with our electeds and our professional staff, and they're a very important part of our community and play a very important job. Obviously, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone on this committee or in the audience today that we do have some concerns with this legislation. Your staff analysis alone outlines that the fiscal impact of this is not known. The only analysis that was done on a very small component of the benefits that are mandated under this, the impact to the Florida retirement system. And so that's just the death benefit and the disability retirement benefit. Most of our firefighters are actually in local plans, so that wouldn't even cover the cost of them, and obviously the impacted cost to both potentially the healthcare system or our health premiums, and also our workers' comp premiums. The bill specifies that this is an alternative to benefits provided under Chapter 440, so therefore they would both be an option. It's really hard to function a government without knowing what your anticipated expenditures are going to be. We have to set budgets, we have to set millage rates, we have to ask the taxpayers to reach into their pockets. And that's really hard to know if we don't know what that amount is. We also do have some concerns with the workability of this bill. For example, there is a requirement in the bill that all of these benefits, specifically the retirement, have to be paid solely by the employer. Well, just like the Florida retirement system requires employees to contribute 3% every year, a lot of our local plans also require that contribution. How would that work in the real world? Are we supposed to reimburse them for premiums? It's just unclear. Also, the effective date of the bill is July 1st. We have a fiscal year that starts on October 1st. So we are currently in a situation where our budgets are set, our millage is set, our health plans are already in place, and so we are not quite sure how the next 3 months are going to work from July to October. At the end of the day, I would love it if we could come up with a dedicated funding source and so that these firefighters and their families can get these benefits, but at the end of the day, it's really hard for us to go and ask taxpayers to reach into their pockets without even knowing what that amount is. I very much appreciate the committee's time today and would be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman? I have
Yes.
a brief question.
You'll be recognized just a moment. First of all, Representative Clemens, you're
Thank you,
recognized for a
Chairman.
question.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. The League of Cities obviously is opposed to this bill because of fiscal constraints. And my question to you is, how would the League of Cities or any of the other members that you represent, how would they handle it if because of this malady, because of this cancer that has been proven that's directly related to the job, how will the city's tax base be affected if there all of a sudden a scarcity of firefighters because nobody wants to go into this profession? How will the cities deal with when the buildings burn down and not only is there no one to put out the fires, but the tax base that the cities operate off of is reduced because of this? It seems to me like this is not an easy fix. It's not an inexpensive fix. It's a necessary fix. These people deserve this particular benefit at this time, because when the citizens in your cities or the cities you represent, they dial 911, they expect somebody to respond, and they expect life to be saved, and they expect their property to be minimized and not lost. So help me with the physical impact, because there's the cost of doing nothing certainly exceeds the cost of doing something, and I'd like your observation.
You recognized?
Well, I think the question was the impact to our tax base if all the buildings burn down. It was, around that. I'm not trying to make light. It was a lot in there. Well, obviously that's something we would have to figure out. But honestly, under this bill, because this only applies to full-time firefighters, and there are exclusions if you have other employment that has a similar or higher risk of cancer. And so, for example, I have a lot of cities that rely on volunteer firefighters. especially in more rural areas. And there is a concern that there would be a lack of availability if you're a professional firefighter on one hand, you probably are not going to want to go be a volunteer firefighter and give up all of these benefits to go, maybe support the city you actually live in. And so there's a concern all the way around there could be a shortage of firefighters. Representative Clemens.
Representative Latvelli, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. If somebody's house catches on fire, do they call the local fire department or do they call their city hall?
You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would assume they call 911, which sometimes is not just the fire departments.
You recognize?
Quick follow-up. Well, does their local city councilman come and put out the fire, or does a firefighter who is risking their lives do that?
You recognize?
Well, ironically enough, I do have some elected officials who are also professional firefighters. So it depends, Representative Latvala. But generally, I would say the firefighters come, obviously.
Okay, Representative Newton, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little background. My baby brother, the baby of eight of us, my 5 brothers and 3 sisters, he was a firefighter in St. Petersburg for 20-some odd years. And then he got injured on the job, and he was trying to go in for to get in the drop plan to try to have some kind of way out, have some kind of income, because of his injury. And the city let him go that day. I remember sitting on the dais at council, and he texted me and he said, "I'm done, bro. EOB," which is end of business. So my question to you is this. These people are dying, protecting property and life that we put ultimate value on. What is the value of their life? I often hear about money with these cities and municipalities, which I held from 8 years on that council. I served on finance and taxation for the League of Cities the whole 8 years I was there. I get it. But my problem is this. When they sacrifice all, what do we do for them? I mean, everything I hear about home rule and city, I get it, but it's about money. PTSD, money, benefit. So what is their benefit? Cancer and die, and then their loved ones, they leave here. They have to deal with that loss and that loss of income and that loss of a family member. This is very personal to me. It might be fun to say, it might be a city council member that
Representative
shows
Newton,
up.
if you could get to the question, please.
I'm getting to the question, if you let me frame it, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry about that, but it's a little personal to me. My question is this. What is the value of a life?
You can answer that if you'd like, or you can just defer.
Mr. Chairman, I am not an actuary. I would prefer not to answer that.
Okay, thank you. Representative McLean, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has there been any contemplation on the part of any members of the League of Cities as it relates to, so if a firefighter were to choose the private health insurance plan versus the workers' compensation, it seems to me that obviously most of the time when you go through a workers' compensation claim at the local level, there will be some settlement done at the end of the day or something like that. Have you all done any type of study as it would relate to what the difference would be between those two payouts and what impact that would have going forward? And certainly it would seem to me that there possibly could be a reduction in your workers' compensation charge to the local governments. Have you all contemplated any of that, or have you done any actuarial studies on that?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So throughout the history of this bill, it originally was a presumption in the workers' comp system. There is existing law that would allow a firefighter to access workers' compensation benefits right now, but we recognize that there are some hurdles to jump through. So the history of the bill is that there had been a presumption similar that we have in the heart, lung, and tuberculosis area. We actually were the ones, when that bill was around, we did have an actuarial study done. I don't actually have the numbers on top of my head because it's been a couple of years, but it was a pretty large impact. We were actually the one to approach the professional firefighters and just with the discussion of taking it out of the workers' comp system. It has been the national trend in a lot of states to go to more than just lump sum benefit payment with the treatment that you would get under your existing health care. When we reached out this year to ask our actuaries to see if they could quantify that, they literally said we can do it, but we don't want to put our names on it because of the complexity and confusion in the bill. We are concerned that the assumptions would not be accurate. And so at the end of the day, we did not want to pursue an actuarial study that we could not stand behind, goes back to our kind of our concerns at the end of the day. I mean, this is an issue that can be addressed at the local level. I know the County of Palm Beach has actually moved forward with a product that they came to that would provide certain types of coverage under workers' comp for their firefighters that have been diagnosed with cancer. And so obviously it could be done at the local level, but we have not been able to put a number, and I know it's not just about the money, but to put a number on this bill today.
Okay, thank you. Representative Omfroy, you're recognized for a question.
How do the cities handle whenever they have any other form of natural disaster or any other emergency citywide?
You recognized.
Can you be more specific? Do you mean in regards to public safety? Do you mean in regards to infrastructure? I mean, that's a very broad question, Mr. Chair.
Representative Omfroy, you're recognized for
Mr. Chair,
clarity.
thank you very much. This is a situation that is, as far as I'm concerned, a disaster or something that's uncommon that needs to be addressed. The cities have protocols in place to address these issues. The cities need to come up with how do the cities handle issues that come up that are not common, or if something that happens that has to be fixed. We have a water main break. You have how do the cities handle things that are uncommon? Do they not have a reserve fund? You're saying that this is something that is going to be something that it's unplanned for, you can't figure out the amounts for. Explain to me how cities naturally handle situations that are uncommon.
You recognize.
Well, I'll use the example of a water main break, if you don't mind, Representative, since that's the one. So I would say that generally sometimes the water main break might be the fault of the city, and sometimes it might be the fault of a utility or someone else working in the right-of-way. And so depending on whose fault it is, then there would be a determination of who needs to pay to restore. I would also say that the example of a water main break is something that you actually could probably potentially quantify at least at a back of the napkin level. You know what it costs contractors to pay them to go out. You know how many hours it might potentially take. You know how much you need to pay to maybe divert traffic and things like that. So yes, there are reserves. I will say there have actually even been bills through this legislature that have tried to lower the amount of reserves that we could keep. Our concern with this is that we don't even have a back of the napkin estimate. We have no idea what it is, and it's going to be effective mid-fiscal year, and we assume we will have retirement costs, we will have health insurance premium increases, and workers' comp premium increases, and the lump sum benefit. So those are a lot of different factors in play that we have been unable to even get a rough estimate about.
Okay, Representative Omfroy, you recognize for another question, but please keep it specific to the firefighter cancer bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My reason for asking the question was just so that the League of Cities needs to talk to its cities to come up with ways to figure this out. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I address that?
You recognize.
Thank you. I think that goes back, Representative Omfrey, to our desire to address it at the local level. Just like Palm Beach County, this can be done during collective bargaining. That is traditionally how we do negotiations with the firefighters. And so at the end of the day, if there's going to be a state mandate without a dedicated resource, we could address this at the local level and have the ability to figure out what is the risk, the appropriate amount, or the appropriate benefit level for each community that their taxpayers would be able to sustain.
Thank you. Representative Hart, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My heart bleeds for the families. But could you tell me, when a firefighter gets cancer and they go and tell their municipality, what happens? Are they fired? Do you know?
I would
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. I would assume not. I'm sure, just as there are many, many cities in this state, there are probably an example of that. But for the most part, as I started off with, these are employees of our city. If our public works director got cancer, he's not going to get fired. And so I would like to think that my cities would work with the individual to ensure that they can get the treatment under the plans that we have in place and move forward. But at the end of the day, I don't know. There's 412 cities, and I do not know every single example statewide.
Follow up.
So is there a cancer bill currently in place throughout the 416 cities?
You
Is there
recognize.
some kind of a cancer plan already in existence in the 416 cities?
You recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is not that I know of. As I mentioned, it is up to, it's part of collective bargaining, and collective bargaining does have two components. It is the city and it is the employees. And so we are only one part of the equation.
Thank you. Representative Good, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Chair. Do you know how many years this type of bill has been around?
You recognize.
You mean this type, meaning going into the health plans? It's only the second year?
This idea of the cancer, extending the coverage to deal with people that have gotten cancer in the line of duty.
You recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming it's longer than I know about, but I know it's at least been the last couple of years.
Representative Good, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. Because part of your argument is that we could deal with this at the local level, but from what I've heard you say today, it's only one city that has dealt with this at the local level in a number of years. Is that correct?
You recognize.
That is what I know.
Thank you.
Representative Newton, did you have another question? You recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is probably one that you can answer with actuary. What is the cost of doing nothing? Since we have 412 cities, 67 counties, and over 21 million people, and you say it should be handled locally. So what's the cost of doing nothing? Because that's where we're currently at.
You recognize. If you know the answer to that question, you'd be recognized. If you don't know, you can.
At the end of the day, I'm a math person, so I recognize that there are non-monetary costs that might be involved, but the cost of doing nothing is nothing. And I'm not saying that flippantly, but there are emotional parts to this argument, and there are more pure policy parts. And I get that a lot of people don't like our discussion of actual policy. But at the end of the day, I'm just here to represent my members the best I can.
Okay. Thank you for being here today. Next up, Robert Chapman. Thank you, sir. Jim Tolley, Florida Professional Firefighters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Tolley, President Professional Firefighters of Florida. I was going to waive in support, but this is a very powerful issue and may address some of the questions here. So I'm going to speak, and I certainly want to thank the chair for putting this forward. We think this is a very important issue. As Amber said, we have had many years of dialogue. To answer your questions, over 20 years. They did come to us and talk about getting it out of workers' comp. Can we find another avenue that's better controlled and provide better treatment to our members so they will survive and live? We've heard a lot of testimony about cancer survivors. We've heard testimony about people that are cut loose. We think when it's an out-of-the-job injury and you reach maximum medical improvement, you're gone. If it's a workers' comp, that may stretch on for a much longer time period. The use of personal leave, sick leave, vacation for an on-the-job injury is very flexible. A firefighter works 24 hours a day that uses 24 hours every time they see a doctor will burn through 144, 200 hours of leave very fast. This bill is going to say this is considered job-related for purposes of this, so that a chief could say, could you please schedule your doctor's appointments at 9 o'clock in the morning? We will do a holdover. It'll cost us 2 hours overtime and only use 2 hours of your leave, thereby extending that, allowing them to get the treatment and not lose their job. There is a cost. We understand there can be a cost. We're not naive enough to believe that if there is a huge cost, that won't end up at the negotiating table. We do not believe that's a huge cost. We think it's going to be a minor cost. And with respect to having everything done at the local level cannot change the Florida retirement system. They cannot change 112. So that's why it's here. There are certain things that have to be done here. The impact and how it's applied back home can certainly be done there. And we would certainly expect that to be negotiated, how all that goes about to implement these as we move forward. I think it's a very, very important issue. We certainly thank you all for hearing this, the speaker for putting this forward, and we request your approval and move forward. Thank you. And I would gladly answer any questions you have.
Okay, Representative Latvala, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, sir. Do you know of any firefighters who have lost their jobs after having a cancer diagnosis?
You recognize?
Sure. Yes. Okay. I mean, we heard a couple testimonies here. I think that happens, yes.
Okay, any other questions from members? Thank you. Representative McLean, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tolley, thank you for being here this morning. Would you expound a little bit? I guess what I thought here is if we were to enact this, I didn't think it was leaving it up to any negotiation back home. And so can you expound on why you think it would be that way? And maybe, again, maybe I'm missing something here, but just help me with that. Thank you.
I don't think that these benefits really, it goes back home to say that you're going to have to negotiate these benefits. But what I was trying to address was the issue that Ms. Hughes had brought forward, that this is a huge impact, that cities don't know what to do with it. So if there is a huge impact, we would expect to see that at the table with the next round of raises, if there's a financial impact. We do not believe there will be.
Okay.
But to further, I guess, to the operational of how we best utilize that sick leave to minimize the cost to the employer, like I said, the fire chief could simply ask, could we make these doctor's appointments at 9 o'clock in the morning?
Thank you for being here today. As president of the Florida Professional Firefighters, next we have
Thank you.
Vice President, the Florida Professional Firefighters, Rocco Salvatore. You're recognized. Okay, don't see him here. Next up, Jim Milliken. Oh, sorry. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and your staff, as well as Chair Ngoli and his staff, for the time and attention you paid to this issue. I'm Rocco Salvatore. I'm the Vice President of the Florida Professional Firefighters, and although it's a difficult issue, not to make emotional because I'm a firefighter also, I am going to try to address some of the technical aspects that have been raised by the committee. To answer the first question, the last time this bill was scheduled for a committee in the House was in 2004. It was in this committee, and it was TP'd. And so this is a really big day for firefighters all over Florida. Thank you. The question of cost is very interesting because the costs of doing something like this in the workers' compensation system were thought to be too high to overcome. And so this is the alternative. Now the alternative to some appears to be too costly. We disagree with that. Ever since this idea came about, ever since this concept came about within our own organization, we have been talking to any insurance company that would listen to us to try to encourage them to develop a product that a city, a municipality, an employer of firefighters could purchase, kind of a package of commercially available insurance products to purchase to comply with this legislation, which we had always hoped would pass. And as we have moved through those estimates, it's interesting that for one aspect of the bill, the $25,000 payment, we have gotten estimates of anywhere from $85 to $140 per year per firefighter. if a municipality chooses not to self-insure that coverage and to purchase it from multiple insurance companies. These insurance companies are exploring, at our request, creating a product so a city would not have to take on all this risk on their own. They could hire an insurance company to take on some of this risk. That's what insurance companies do. The pension costs to the FRS, you're very, very aware of that, which the majority of our membership are members of the FRS. We believe about 60% are not members of city pension plans, that they're members of the Florida retirement system. Those costs, as you know, are 0.09% of payroll. That's what we would consider worth it. And we also engaged the actuary that represents the majority of our firefighter pension plans for the city pension plans and asked them to come up with an actuarial analysis of what it would cost. Of course, all of those plans are very different from each other, so they could not do an analysis, but what they did do is an estimate. And that estimate was that of all of the plans they represent, which I believe is close to 100, they thought the cost estimate would be less than 0.25% of payroll to provide the benefits that this bill requires. And one of the other aspects of the bill that would have a cost is the reimbursement of out-of-pocket costs for health insurance. Knowing that we have hundreds of employers of firefighters in the state, and they have hundreds, sometimes a multiple of hundreds, of health insurance products available to their employees, that is next to impossible to cost. But I can tell you, as a firefighter myself, with a city-sponsored health insurance plan, my out-of-pocket maximum cost is about $3,000 per year for any event. That's my, we all have a health insurance plan, and some of us are lucky enough or privileged enough to have a maximum out-of-pocket cost. My maximum out-of-pocket cost is $3,000, so that is their exposure there. I assume that my employer could choose to share the risk with an insurance company on that as well. So I very much apologize to the people that came up here and told their story. I don't want to be talking about technical details instead of hearing the horrible tragedies that have been going on within the world that we live in, but it needed to be said, and I am happy to answer any questions. We have reams of data on this. Like I said, we have been trying to get this in front of the Florida House for decades, and we are very much appreciative that you are paying this the attention it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Newton, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony, Mr. Rocco. Have you provided this information to the League of Cities? Because they can't seem to figure out any of this stuff that you have.
You recognized?
This information has been in the public record for the couple of years that we've been working on this concept. We do regularly talk to the League of Cities and try to come to common ground as much as we can. We have done that very successfully in the past. This seems to be an issue that we're having more difficulty doing that. So yes, they're aware of this information.
Okay, Representative Polsky, you recognized for a question.
Thank you, Chair. This is a little bit different topic, and I'm not sure you can answer it, but maybe someone else can. There was talk about the increase in cancer over the last 10, 20 years. Is there a reason, a scientific reason why anyone knows why? Is it building materials? Is there something going on that's causing more cancer now than had been prior to this time period?
You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish I could answer that. I can only speculate, and that's not a Florida problem. President Trump signed a bill into law federally to try to figure out that, to create a firefighter cancer registry. Who's getting cancer? What kind of cancers are they? There's a tumor bank being started through the University of Miami and other researchers to try to find out if these tumors are unique. Anecdotally, as a firefighter, I've been doing this about 20 years. When I talk to my brothers and sisters behind me, something we talk about is how fires used to smell different. A dumpster fire smelled different than a house fire. It smelled different than a car fire. It smelled different than a brush fire. And now a house smells the same as a dumpster fire. A car fire smells the same as a dumpster. They're all burning plastic. They're all burning chemicals. And I don't want to alarm anybody. I think much like lightweight construction, these things are safe. And they're safe until they catch on fire. And the concepts in our protective clothing that protect us, they protect us from heat, they protect us from inhaling toxins, but they're not protecting it from getting on our skin. And Rep. Payne, I see you nodding. You and I have discussed this extensively. I very much appreciate your attention to that. We really want gear that protects us. We really want to warn firefighters to take care of themselves. I think this is a multi-pronged approach. I think we have to do what's right. I think our employers have to do what's right. I think the gear manufacturers have to do what's right. So I think when somebody can answer that question, you're going to see a dramatic drop in this horrible firefighter cancer problem.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member DeBose, you recognized for a question. Okay, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Next up, Jim Milliken, Florida Fire Chiefs Association. Jim Milliken, are you here? Okay, next up, Jimmy Petronas, CFO and State Fire Marshal. You recognized?
Thank you, Chairman and members. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And Chairman Ngolia, thank you so much for sponsoring this PCB. Appreciate your leadership. 70% of the deaths that occur in the line of duty with our firefighters are cancer related. 15% more likely to contract cancer than you or I. To me, those numbers are just simply unacceptable. We must join the other 45 states in order to finally bring a benefit forward for our heroes, our brave first responders, our firefighters. This message that you're sending today, with this being on your agenda, tells this population, these heroes, these public servants that always have our backs 24/7, 365, that we have their backs. Thank you for your leadership in putting this bill on the agenda, moving it forward, and letting that service know that they're not being forgotten about. I want to share a fact with you, and I want you to consider your own communities, and we've talked about it a little bit here. We're all fantastic public servants. We all think that we, set the bar, okay? But let me tell you something. There's not a single idea that comes out of this fantastic legislative body that we have called the Florida Legislature that comes to life without a robust safety net that works 24/7, 365 in the background. You don't have good schools. Companies don't want to relocate. Investments aren't made. And what you're doing today is you're making this profession attractive. You're making this profession understood that it is noble to go into, and you're making this profession known and feel at the highest level of state government in the state of Florida that we want you to have peace of mind to do your job. There's a guy named Dwayne McKeever. Dwayne's not here today. He was here yesterday. But Dwayne's my hero. About 2 years ago, I had no idea what this issue was. I'll be honest with you. I was new on the job. And I'm in South Manatee eating chili at a fire station. Think it's cool. I'm there with a bunch of other firemen. And I have no idea. I'm just there to, almost like a photo op opportunity. I'm new on the job, and I get really excited about wearing the badge. And I'm sitting there talking, and next thing I know, Dwayne starts telling me about fighting cancer. This guy got 2 kids, age 14 and 12, little boy, little girl. And he's fought his 3rd round of cancer, and it was December 15th. I was there in November. It was December 15th. And he's going to go into Moffitt to go get colon cancer treatment. He had 12 inches of his colon removed. And he went back the other day, and things are good, but, they got a couple spots still that they're monitoring, but they're not growing, and they're too small to do surgery on. So here this guy is going to go to work and show up every single day knowing this stuff's inside of him, okay? But he's got such a just can-do attitude. He's got such a, the glass is always half full. And, last year y'all showed such amazing leadership of passing PTSD. And so in Tampa last year, Megan Villa, who I thought was the face of PTSD with our first responders, Dwayne and Megan got to meet each other for the first time. And afterwards, Dwayne calls me and he says, he says, I've never wanted to talk about my illness until I met Megan. I've never shared that story with anybody. And I called Megan earlier today and I said, you know what? Today is a good day in the Florida legislature. Today we are putting forward a bill to give cancer benefits to our firefighters. And I just want to let you know that it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for folks like Dwayne, folks like Heather, all these men and women that come in and advocate. But more importantly, it doesn't happen without a single one of you. So, Speaker Oliva and President Galvano, thank you so much for your leadership in putting this bill up. I know you're watching somewhere from another room, but this would not happen if it wasn't you. And I am so proud and honored to stand before you today, and I'm so proud to be a retired member of your body. You are all amazing people. God bless.
Thank you. That'll conclude public testimony. We're going to move into member debate now. Representative Latvala, you're recognized in debate. And members, please early raise your hand and make it known that you want to debate so we can move through quickly. You recognize Representative Latvala.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to start out by thanking our speaker, Jose Oliva. This issue has been around long before he served in the House and served as our speaker. But as was mentioned, this is the first time in years that this bill has been put for, has heard in a committee. I also wanted to thank our chairman, Chairman Ngoglia, for sponsoring this PCB, our speaker designate, Chris Sprouse, as well as our CFO, Jimmy Petronas, for their leadership on this issue. After hearing the representative from the Florida League of Cities, I sat here and asked myself, why on earth would somebody want to be a firefighter in the state of Florida? You risk your life, you get a pat on the back, and if you get sick, you're on your own. But it takes a special person with a special calling. It takes somebody like Cliff Kramer, who was a high school friend of mine, one of the funniest guys I've ever known in my life, who died 5 years after graduating high school while training to be a firefighter, died while running the mile in his gear. It takes people like Ms. Zombo, Mr. Post, and Mr. McKay, who are here and testified. And it takes a special person like a old retired firefighter with the nickname Bull, who started his trek in Key West last year and walked across the state to get advocacy for this bill and to make it known what this bill would do and the plight of his brothers and sisters. Members, this is a very important day in the Florida House, and it's, one of those days that whenever I'm old and retired, I'll think about the important days that we had, and a lot of the stuff that we do is long forgotten about. But I can't think of anything more important that we could do than pass this bill. And thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Hart, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I ran in 2016, I had absolutely no idea that firefighters did not have cancer insurance. But as I knocked on doors and I met with the fire department and everybody was like, well, will you support cancer insurance for firefighters? Then I get to come to Tallahassee in 2018. And my sweet Cindy Polo is next door to me. And she came over and she was like, did you know we've got to fight for cancer insurance this year for firefighters? I was like, well, no, I didn't know much about it, but okay, I'm willing to do whatever you need me to do to help you. Firefighters came to Tallahassee, had over 100 pairs of boots outside. 500. I walked among the boots. I took pictures of all the firemen from my area who had died of cancer. I took pictures of many other areas where people had died of cancer. But I got an opportunity to talk to an awesome woman whose husband had died from cancer. And when she started telling me how sick he was and how he couldn't just go and tell his boss that he had cancer for fear of losing his job, that's why I asked that question. There were so many firemen that have lost their jobs once they tell or reveal that they have cancer. Nobody should have to suffer in silence. And that's how I saw it when I talked to those wives downstairs outside as we walked through those booths. I cannot believe a state as large as ours, with over 20 million people, would not have done something for you all many years ago. Every single day, somebody throughout our state of Florida is dialing 911 for a fireman or a policeman. But you all put your lives on the line. You go into buildings that are burning to save somebody else. How could we not save you? And if that's, I just cannot say enough about you all and how much we appreciate you. How we owe, many of us owe our lives to our fire departments. My son was at a club and he was cut from one end of his neck to another. I have to tell you, had it not been for the fire department that responded immediately, it wasn't a fire, my baby would be dead today. So I know how important you all are to us, not just in fighting fires, but in everyday life. For people who are having heart attacks when you all show up to help us. There could never be an amount of money put on your lives. So I'm here to tell you that whatever it is that we can do in this legislature, I'm willing to stand beside you and fight every step of the way. Now I want my firemen back in my office.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank you all for being here and for sharing your stories.
Thank you, Representative Polsky. You recognize in debate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to repeat all the thanks because I agree with all of you. I just wanted to make a shout out to my friend, a hero firefighter, Representative Matt Wilhite, who's in the back, who brought this forward. Thank you for all your diligence. Thank you for the job that you do every day up here and back home in Palm Beach County. And I'm so proud of all of us who co-sponsored this in a huge way, over 80 legislators, bipartisan effort. I know that we're going to pass this today, and I hope that we can continue to do the great work that you all deserve. Thank you, Representative Wilhite, and everyone else for being here.
Thank you. Representative DeSiglia, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank all of the firefighters in this room. I want to thank all the firefighters across this great state for putting your lives on the line each and every day. I also did not know that this was a significant problem. Conditions are changing. We heard testimony today. You know, the smell of the smoke is changing. We have a problem. And we here in the legislature, I'm a freshman. I've been extremely honored of the policy that has been moving in this institution. We lead here in the state of Florida. We're the third largest state in this country. The least we can do is to lead on this issue. And so I have worked really hard these last several months as a new member. I try to take the emotion out of deciding what is good public policy. You cannot take the emotion out of this. These are real stories. These are real people. These are people that you all put your lives on the line for all of us. And this is good public policy. This is the right thing to do. When it comes to the costs and it comes to making those decisions at the local level, you know, I'm a small business owner. Every once in a while, you just have to figure it out. I have to take care of my employees, okay? We have to take care of our first responders and our firefighters. So my message to the local governments, just figure it out. I guarantee you'll be able to figure it out. I'm very up on this bill. Thank you again for all you do. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Payne, you recognize in debate.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank, first of all, Chair Ngoli for bringing the PCB forward. Certainly Representative Wilhite, Mr. Tolley, Rocco, CFO Petronas. You know, in 2004, this bill was TP. We heard that earlier. And in 2016, as a freshman, I heard a member of the League of Cities say, I'm sorry, okay, a member of the League of Cities say being a firefighter and having cancer was a condition of employment. That's unacceptable. And I still feel that way. You know, the routes of entry to exposure for a firefighter through inhalation hazards have been addressed through a better SCBA. The routes of exposure through dermal contact have been helped through Kevlar material. But the routes of exposure through absorption hazards are still what firefighters are fighting every day, and that's how they're getting cancer. And so we have to continue to as Vice President Rocco said, to continue to work on that through technology. But the smell of the smoke is different. And I worked in an industrial setting, and there was an industrial firefighter at one time. And I can tell you that the exotic materials that we have created today create those different types of materials that are much more toxic to firefighters. And firefighters are exposed every time they go in simply through those different routes of entry, one being the absorption entry hazard I talked about. The Silvestri Center has done extensive studies on it. They have good data. We should believe that data. So I'd say to you, what is the price of a life? What is the price we're willing to put on a life? And are we willing to continue to put firefighters at those levels of exposure without giving them some means to an end? Members, I'm proud and honored to be able to support this bill today, and I hope you all will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Clemens. You recognize in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just about everything that could be said about this bill, emotional and otherwise, have been said. CFO Petronas probably put it together and crystallized it better than I ever could have. I have 7 firefighters in my family. So I come from a history of public servants. The difference between them, who are my heroes, and the public service that I provide is that my life is not in danger every day when I give that public service. Yours is. I'm up on this bill. No one can convince me otherwise. It's a long time in coming. I'm not a bookie, but I predict a unanimous vote in the committee. I predict a unanimous vote on the House, and I'm there ready to help all of you with the next biggest issue, and that is our cost of living adjustment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McLean, you recognize in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was sitting here, I was very disappointed with the answer that I received to the question that I asked of the representative of the League of Cities, because I asked, have you done an analysis of what this will cost the League of Cities? Have you then also taken into account that there may be a reduction in your workers' comp side if you choose to do it this way? What I was told, what the answer was, well, yeah, we've done that, but the actuarials who've put it together don't want to stand behind it. So, in full disclosure, I'm an old local government guy. I have 12 years on the county commission. I used to ask these questions a lot of my administrative staff, and I would say, can we do this program, or can we do such and such? And a lot of times they would come back and they would say, oh, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. And it would be a huge number. And so I would back up a little bit, and maybe I'd think about it for a couple of days, and I'd say, wait, though, if we do that, we're going to have a corresponding decrease over here. So the true cost wasn't this, it may be a different number. Then I'm even more disappointed that we have one set of folks who have they have the numbers. You've run your numbers. Your actuarials have put your numbers together for you. You have them. You have offered to give them to them. And they either, A, they're not compelled to do it, which is what will happen today when we pass this PCB here in this committee. They will be compelled to come to the table and to have that conversation. But we're not having an honest conversation, and I think that's what we talk about a lot here in the Florida House. We have that conversation a lot amongst ourselves. If we're gonna debate an issue, let's make sure that we're having an honest conversation about the true cost, or about the true impact it is to the communities, or whatever it might be. And so I was disappointed from that perspective. We will compel them to come to the table and to accept facts. This isn't something that you're not making these numbers up. Actuarials, people sit around all day insurance folks, they have actuarial people that sit around all day crunching numbers. To say that they don't know what a cost would be of a cancer treatment as it relates to a certain type of cancer, those numbers are run day after day after day after day by insurers and other folks. And so I'll be up on this bill, and we'll look forward to bringing it to the floor of the House, and I'll be in support of it. And thank you all for being here today and for your service to our communities.
Okay, we have a number of other members wishing to debate. Looks like Representatives Newton, Schlossberg, Grahl, Watson, and Roth. So we'll go in that order. Representative Newton, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the leadership, all the way from the governor's office to the CFO to the Senate President to the Speaker of the House. You know, I had a front row seat to the whole thing. I mean, serving 8 years on the council, going into executive sessions and talking about how we deal with our first responders, police, and fire, and knowing what I know from serving those 8 years on the taxation and finance for the League of Cities, and the conversations that we have as it pertains to benefits and providing for the people that we say are important to us. And I know what goes on behind those closed doors. I know what's said. Also, I know that when it's convenient, everybody loves their first responders. But when I started my political career in 2006, we had 3 core responsibilities. The number one was public safety. That's police, fire, EMT. Because without that, you ain't gonna have no city. You know what I'm saying? Somebody starts shooting, everybody's gonna run out of this room. If there's a fire, everybody's gonna run out of the building. So if it ain't safe, you ain't gonna have no citizens, no infrastructure, and no city. Number 2 is infrastructure, sanitation, water, sewage, and garbage. Because if you got garbage sitting everywhere and trash and sewage around, people don't wanna live around that either. And number 3, you get down to the feel-good things, parks, libraries, dog parks, stuff like that. And I swore to make sure that our first responders had everything they needed. Hear me now, needed, not wanted, because some of them wanted Lamborghinis and Porsches and stuff like that. But to make sure they had everything they needed to get their jobs done. And when I hear we just went through, I think it was 12 amendments, and the only one that did not pass was Amendment 1. And that was the individuals that this legislature gave the opportunity to get themselves an additional $25,000 property tax exemption. In every municipality that I know, including mine and the 4 counties I represent, Hillsborough, Manatee, Sarasota, and Pinellas, was harping about how it's going to be the end of the world if this thing passes. And what they sold the voters on was that we need this. This is the money we use to take care of our first responders. That's what they said. I think in Pinellas County, it was looking at a $20 million hit. In the city of St. Pete, it was around $6 to $8 million. So these municipalities, which the coffers are overflowing, they're at their pre-Bush recession levels, which means they got more money than they know what to do with. Plus, they factored in the hit, $20 million, $6 to $8 million, respectively, for Amendment 1 passing. Hear me now, for Amendment 1 passing. Amendment 1 did not pass. So they're sitting here with all this money. But when you talk about things that are important, that's why I asked the question of how much is the cost of doing nothing, and then how much is the cost of a life? And there was no answers. And that bothers me. Because when I sat in these executive sessions and hear that when the firefighter or the first responders near the end of their useful life, they're getting ready to go into retirement, which is equivalent to 20 to 30 years of unemployment with a little bit of money that they're going to have to try to survive off of, we start jerking around with their benefits. Now, I look over to a city senior administrator, and they tell me, I say, this is a really bad deal for them now that they need this benefit or they need this insurance. And the administrator looks at me and goes, yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? I've been in those conversations. And now that we get up here, I get to the legislature and have an opportunity to see firsthand 67 counties, 412 cities, 21 million people. The same argument persists. It's all about money, 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 money. But for our first responders, our police, our fires, our safe communities, the protection of property and life, it wouldn't be a city. Wouldn't be anybody to talk about it's going to cost, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. It wouldn't even be that. So that argument, I think, is lame. And I agree with my colleague DeSegler. You have to find a way. And when Rocco came up and gave the numbers about the insurance and all the stuff that they had, and I can't believe that they don't have the resources at the Florida League of Cities to get that information or to provide it to their memberships or their willingness to be able to do just that. I want to thank everybody, and I want to apologize first and foremost for the way that the people you put up here to take care of you act and the way they provide for you. This is a travesty. They know people are dying. They know this. And the way you explain the way is you start tying it to money, what you can't do. Well, I spell can't, C-A-N. Then I get to the T. It's the willingness to do the right thing. I want to also thank my baby brother who's probably watching for his service to the city of St. Pete. And this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to make sure it's done. Thank you.
Representative Schlossberg, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying thank you, Chair Angolia, and thank you, Representative Matt Wilhite and CFO Petronas, for all of your hard work on this issue. I also want to give a shout out to the firefighters that are here from Palm Beach County and say I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for you guys responding as fast as you did. You guys saved my life and hundreds of thousands of other lives in Palm Beach County and throughout the state. When a firefighter wakes up every day and puts their lives on the line, once diagnosed with cancer, that firefighter is fighting the biggest fight of his life. We shouldn't make that firefighter have to fight for these benefits while they're dying. It's just not right. And this is probably one of the most important pieces of legislation moving through this chamber. And I want to say thank you again to all the firefighters. I'm not going to repeat what everybody has said, but I'm urging my colleagues to support this good legislation. Thank you.
Representative Grall, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as many of you know, my family was touched by the effects of PTSD many years ago, and through that experience, I've had the opportunity to speak with many colleagues of our family member about various challenges that the firefighter community faces. And I think what's interesting here to me today is that we are having a conversation about the fiscal as if cancer will continue at current rates if this legislation passes. And this is where it is about you do something and you figure it out. There are ways to mitigate the risk. And right now, our local governments are not always in the position where they are having to prioritize the mitigation of that risk because they don't have responsibility for the ultimate cost. And although I don't practice workers' compensation insurance, I've had the opportunity to meet with some firefighter families who've been affected by chemical exposure on the job. And the burden of proof in the workers' compensation statute is so high. It is so high, and it virtually eliminates all risk to the county because it's impossible to prove. So that is the situation that we find ourselves in. And when you eliminate the risk, the employer's not forced to make the decisions that mitigate the damages to the families and to our firefighter community. And so I would say that this bill will assist our local governments in prioritizing health and safety. And that hopefully a decade from now, we are not having the conversation about the lives that are lost due to cancer anymore. And that cost is not one that our government is bearing because we are providing the safety measures that we need in order to ensure that those willing to risk their life can go back out into the field every day, be the examples of strong citizens that they are to the families, to everybody in our communities. And the cost of doing nothing is in fact the loss of life. the loss of human capital in a job that does not seem glamorous for many. And it is the loss of those who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for our neighbors. And so I am honored to be here at this time with Representative Wilhite, who has continued to make these issues a priority and has figured out a way to navigate these issues in both chambers. I'm proud to call him a colleague and to stand for those colleagues of my family member that we lost a few years ago. So thank you.
Representative Watson, you recognize in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the chair of this committee for bringing this bill forward and having the courage to address this very critical and important issue. And thank you to our CFO, Petronas, who have been a great steward for our firemen and women who are protecting us. I supported this bill early on. I co-sponsored it, and I will continue to support this bill. I listened carefully to everyone who spoke on this issue, and I listened with pause to the representative from the League of Cities. And I have a unique perspective because I have 30 years of municipal experience. And 20 of those years I worked alongside firemen as a police officer. And 10 of those years I was a city manager where I hired public safety personnel, and I had to deal with and juggle the budget and make it work. And when I think of our firemen and women who are running into buildings when everyone run out, when they're going in with toxins that they know possibly could end their lives, when they continue to protect us, whether we deserve it or not, what are we going to do to protect them? And there was discussion about there's a lot of emotion in the room and not enough policy. Well, I'll come to you on the policy end as a former city manager. I come to you on the policy end as a former police administrator. And I come to you as a cancer survivor who was diagnosed 2 years ago with cancer. And after 8-hour surgery and 6 weeks of daily radiation, I'm cancer-free today. And I understand that test that we get every few months and how scary it is to sit there and wait to see what those numbers look like, because I have that test every 3 months. And we talked about the revenue. Excuse me. And how it will affect the budget. And certainly we've had a lot of issues that affect our budgets, unintended. But we also must think about the families of and the children of those firemen and women who are diagnosed with cancer, and look to these individuals to take care of them for the rest of their lives. Look to them so that they can go to school. Look to them so that mortgages can be paid. They, too, are thrown in a quandary with budgeting. So I think we have a responsibility and an obligation to the people who make us safe. And it's about time that we protect those who protect us. Thank you.
Representative Roth, you recognize in debate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chair Angolia, for allowing us to hear this good bill today. It's really an honor to be on this great committee and to have to follow the leadership. I'm so thankful to CFO Petronas and our leadership in the House and Senate. I want to go back a couple years when I first served 2 years ago. And start off by saying I remember in one committee listening to testimony of what I call my good friend, Representative Wilhite. I too, I want to tell Representative Polsky, she stole my notes. It was over 80 people co-sponsored, and proud to co-sponsor this legislation and follow Representative Wilhite's lead. He is our legislative delegation chairman in Palm Beach County and doing an excellent job. And I really appreciate his leadership on this. But he brought this before committee 2 years ago and talking about PTSD. And I'm going to say the same comments today that I said 2 years ago. We have an obligation as a legislature to really look at this. And we're struggling all the time with how we're going to do these things, because a lot of times we're talking about the urgent, and a lot of times we're talking about what's really important. Another way of saying it, we're talking about what we have to do now and what are we going to do in the future. And we are on a trajectory that is very, very important, that was started with PTSD, and now we're dealing with cancer benefits. And then the third thing we're going to have to deal with is the cost going forward. And as I said 2 years ago, the answer to that is innovation and technology. It's not good enough, even though we're all proud to be here and be part of this legislation, it's not good enough to provide for the cancer benefits. We have got to cure the problem. We have got to spend the money. I don't care if it's a Russian spacesuit, because we don't make U.S. spacesuits anymore. We've got to do something to make sure that these firefighters, when they go in there, that, I mean, to me it's unconscionable. We're talking about, oh, this fire smells different than that fire. The firefighters are we know that they're dealing with these issues, and it's okay. So we really do have to look at the long-term cost. And my heart does go out to the lady from the League of Cities. We do have to consider all of this. We do have to consider the lives and the impacts and what we're asking our firefighters to do. But we also have to figure out the cost. And I think we have to go to the next step. So I think we are on the right trajectory, and I'm proud to be part of this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further debate, Chair Ngolia, you're recognized to close on PCB SAC 1904.
I waive quote. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not waiving quotes. Couple comments. First, I really want to thank Rocco Salvatore and Jim Tolley. You guys put this on my radar very, very early in the session. And just want to make a point. Anyone who has been to my office knows that it's very cluttered, but there is a reason for that, is because it's cluttered in a way that it's always reminding me it's positioned as stuff to the left and stuff to the right. And there's stuff there, there's papers there that it's strategically positioned to remind me of things, constantly remind me of things. And anybody who has come into my office probably noticed that the data and the sheets about cancer presumption was always on the top of that stack on the left-hand side. Never left my desk from day one. So this issue has been on my mind since the beginning of session with this concept. And not only has it been on my mind, we have, contrary to what you have read in some of the papers, there has always been ongoing discussions with House leadership and Speaker Oliva on this issue, because I'm in frequent contact with him. So we've continued having this dialogue about this issue, because we know how important our first responders and our firefighters are to our communities. So I just wanted to dispel that myth, because this was an ongoing conversation. And I want to thank Jim and I want to thank Rocco for their tenacity in making sure that
this was kept in front of us. So obviously, this is a PCB, and as with large PCBs, well, PCBs that are of major importance to the Florida legislature, it is customary that the chair carries these bills of great importance. And I will tell you that I am absolutely honored to be carrying this piece of legislation. As somebody who has helped advocate for firefighters issues in the past, it was in the Government Operations and Technology Appropriations Subcommittee that we rewrote the PTSD bill. So when we had the opportunity to do this bill, it wasn't a no, it wasn't a yes, it was a hell yes. So I am absolutely honored to do this. Want to put some of this in perspective. You know, we just saw on TV the other day the Notre Dame fire. 850-year-old structure made of wood. That Notre Dame fire was probably safer in terms of the effect on the people battling the fire than a basic fire today that our firefighters have to go in with all the chemicals burning up. And that's a big difference between what was and what is. And I also want to piggyback on what Nick DeSigli, Rep. DeSigli said before. And this is where I get emotional, is that my employees, I treat them like family. Our employees are family. And I believe that you are gauged as an employer, as a human being, by how we treat others, especially our employees, and if we treat them like family. So I think doing this is not only the right thing to do, it's the human thing to do, and it's what we should be doing for our employees, because our firefighters are our family. I want to thank the speaker for continuing to have this dialogue with me. It's something that you don't see. It's something that you don't hear, but it is a dialogue that we had continued to have throughout this process. So I want to thank him for his leadership on the issue and continuing to listen. And I want to leave with this, is that to all of the firefighters who have come up here today advocating for this, especially the people who are dealing with cancer right now or have dealt with cancer, I want to thank you for your service. I know how difficult it is. Obviously, we've all been touched by cancer in our families. I want to guarantee you two things right now, that each and every one up here are going to vote for this good bill today, and each and every one of us are going to pray for you all tonight. So with that, I close.
With Chair Angolia having closed, Tori, please call the roll.
Chair Angolia,
Yes.
Representatives Clemens, DeSegli, Drake, DeBose,
Yes.
Good, Grawl, Hart, Hattersley, Latvala, McLean, McClure, Newton, Payne, Higman, Plakin,
Yes.
Polsky, Rawshine, Rodriguez, Roth, Schlossberg, Trumbull, Watson, Zika, 24 yeas, 0 nays.
The bill passes unanimously. We'll be reporting it favorably.